Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I worked in construction for 15 years, and for the last 10 of those, I was a salesman at a mid-sized hardware store. Started out swinging hammers and laying foundations, but a back injury when I was 32 put an end to the heavy lifting. The store owner knew my background and figured my experience would help customers solve their problems. He was right. After 10 years behind that counter, there wasn't much I hadn't seen or fixed. The pay wasn't great, but I liked helping people figure out their projects. Most customers were decent folks who just needed some guidance. Sure, you'd get the occasional know-it-all who argued about everything, but that came with the territory. My co-worker at the sales counter was this sharp young woman who'd been with us for about 3 years. She had a natural talent for the business and could diagnose problems faster than guys with twice her experience. She'd studied construction management in college before switching to business, so she understood both the technical side and how to talk to customers. Honestly, she was our best salesperson. The store layout was pretty simple. Main counter up front where we handled most customer questions, with my desk right behind it where I did paperwork and inventory. We worked well together, taking turns with customers depending on who was free. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when this whole thing went down. I was catching up on some supplier invoices while she handled a steady stream of customers. The store was busy but not crazy, just the usual mix of contractors picking up materials and homeowners working on weekend projects. This older guy walks in, maybe 65, wearing clean khakis and a polo shirt. Definitely a homeowner, not a contractor. He approached the counter where my co-worker was standing. My co-worker greeted him and asked how she could help him today. The man told her no, that he needed a man who knew what he was doing to help him instead. I looked up from my paperwork. My co-worker's face went red, and I could see her jaw clench. She'd dealt with this kind of attitude before, but it never got easier. The customer repeated that he wanted someone who actually knew about construction. My co-worker turned to me and asked if I could please take over. I told her sure, no problem. Now, I should mention that I have what you might call a warped sense of humor. When people act like jerks, especially to my co-workers, I tend to get creative with my responses. This guy wanted a man to help him? Fine. He get exactly what he asked for. I asked the customer what I could help him with. He explained that he had a leak under his kitchen sink. Water was dripping from somewhere, but he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Instead of answering, I turned around to my co-worker and repeated his problem. I told her that this gentleman had a leak under his kitchen sink and that water was dripping, but he couldn't locate the source. She said it was probably the supply line connections or the P-trap. She told me to tell him to check where the water lines connect under the sink first, then look at the curved pipe underneath. I turned back to the customer and repeated exactly what she had said. I told him he'd want to check where the water lines connect under the sink first, then look at the curved pipe underneath. The customer looked confused but nodded. Then he said that the water seemed to be coming from higher up and asked what to do if it wasn't those connections. I turned back to my co-worker and repeated his question about the water coming from higher up. She said it could be the faucet base or the sprayer connection if he had one. She told me he should look where the faucet meets the sink. I turned back to the customer and told him it could be the faucet base or the sprayer connection if he had one, and that he should check where the faucet meets the sink. By now the customer was starting to look annoyed, but he hadn't caught on yet. He asked what tools he would need for this repair. I turned to my co-worker and asked her what tools he would need. She said he'd need an adjustable wrench, maybe some plumber's putty if it was a seal issue, and probably some Teflon tape. I repeated her answer to the customer word for word, telling him he'd need an adjustable wrench, maybe some plumber's putty if it was a seal issue, and probably some Teflon tape. The customer's eyes were starting to narrow. A few other customers had gathered nearby, pretending to browse while obviously listening. He asked how much this would cost to fix. I turned to my co-worker and repeated his question about the cost. She said it depended on what was wrong, but probably under $20 if it was just connections, maybe $50 if he needed to replace parts. I turned back to the customer and told him it depended on what was wrong, but probably under $20 if it was just connections, maybe $50 if he needed to replace parts. And now the guy was getting really irritated. He demanded to know why I kept asking her for answers. I explained that he had wanted a man to help him, and I was helping him. I pointed out that I was the one talking to him. He complained that I was just repeating what she said. I agreed that was correct. I explained that she actually knew more about plumbing than I did, and that she'd been our top salesperson for 3 years running. But since he had specifically said he needed a man, here I was, being his man, telling him exactly what she would tell him. The customer was getting red now. Other customers were starting to chuckle. My coworker spoke up and told the customer that she had been trying to help him from the beginning and that she'd solved hundreds of plumbing problems. The customer said this was ridiculous and demanded to speak to our manager. I told him I'd get the manager for him. I walked to the back office and found my manager. I explained the situation and he just shook his head and smiled. He'd been dealing with difficult customers for 20 years. When we came back out, the customer launched into his complaint. He said that we employees were making fun of him and that he'd asked for help, but we were playing games instead. My manager asked if he understood correctly that the customer had specifically requested help from a man. The customer said yes, that he had wanted someone qualified. My manager pointed out that he had gotten help from a man who had answered all his questions. The customer realized he was trapped. He'd gotten exactly what he asked for. My manager told him that if he wanted to continue getting help with his plumbing problem, either of his employees would be happy to assist him. But if he was going to be disrespectful to the staff, he could take his business elsewhere. The guy stood there for a moment, clearly struggling with his pride. Finally, he turned to my coworker and grudgingly asked what he needed to buy. She walked him through the entire repair, recommended the right parts, and even drew him a little diagram. He bought everything he needed and left without another word. After he was gone, my manager pulled me aside. He said my approach was clever, but maybe I shouldn't make it a regular thing. I told him I'd only do it for the special customers. He said that was fair enough. My coworker came over afterward and thanked me for having her back, but said she could have handled the customer herself. I told her I knew she could have, but sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. He came back 2 weeks later with another plumbing question. This time he walked straight up to my coworker and asked for her help. No mention of needing a man. She solved his problem in about 2 minutes. Time is money, especially when you grow up in a household where your parents work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Every minute spent working should be paid for. This mindset served me well through college and my early career, but it really came into play when I landed what I thought would be a decent office job at a mid-sized company. I had been job hunting for 3 months after graduating with my business degree. The economy wasn't great, and entry-level positions were hard to come by. When this company finally called me back for an interview, I was desperate enough to take almost anything. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was steady work with benefits, and I figured I could gain some experience and move up later. The job itself was pretty standard office work, data entry, filing, basic administrative tasks. What I didn't expect was the toxic culture that came with it. My supervisor was this middle-aged guy who had been with the company for over 15 years. He managed a small team of 10 people, and I was the newest hire. From day one, everyone made it clear that I was at the bottom of the hierarchy. They called everyone who had been there longer their senior, which basically meant I had to defer to everyone else's opinions and requests. On my very first day, right when we were wrapping up our work, my supervisor told us that it was time for our daily team meeting. He told everyone to log off their computers and head to the conference room. I looked at the clock. It was exactly 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before our official end time of 5 p.m. I figured this was just a quick wrap-up meeting that would end right at 5. No big deal. We all filed into the conference room and my supervisor started talking about the next day's priorities, upcoming deadlines, and general company updates. Nothing urgent or groundbreaking, just routine stuff that could have easily been sent in an email. The meeting dragged on and on. When I finally looked at my watch again, it was 5:15 p.m. We had been in there for 20 minutes, 15 minutes past our official clock out time. I didn't say anything since it was my first day, but I made a mental note to ask about overtime pay later. The next day, same thing happened. 4:55 p.m. came around, and we were called into another meeting that lasted until 5:15 p.m. This became the daily routine every single day, without fail. I thought to myself that at least I was getting paid an extra 20 minutes each day. That was an extra 2.5 hours per week, which would add up on the paycheck. When my first payday arrived 2 weeks later, I eagerly checked my pay stub. I saw my full 80 hours accounted for, but something was missing. Those extra 2.5 hours from the daily meetings were nowhere to be found. I thought maybe there was a mistake, so I approached one of my coworkers during lunch. I asked him if he got paid for those daily meetings we had after 5. He looked confused and asked what I meant. I explained about the meetings that ran from 5 to 5:15 every day, wondering if that showed up as overtime on his paycheck. He told me that no, we don't get paid for those meetings, and that they had never gotten paid for those meetings. I was stunned. I asked a couple more people, and they all said the same thing. We were expected to attend mandatory meetings every single day after our official work hours, and we weren't being paid for it. That afternoon, when 4:55 p.m. rolled around, my supervisor told everyone to log off and head to the conference room. I did what he said, sitting in the meeting room listening to the same routine updates. But this time I kept my eye on the clock. When it hit 5 p.m., our official end time, I stood up and said that I needed to be somewhere important. Everyone turned to stare at me. The room went completely silent. My supervisor looked surprised but didn't seem to know how to respond. He just said, "Okay," and I walked out of the room, clocked out, and went home. I could feel everyone's eyes on me when I left, but I didn't care. The next day, same thing. 5 p.m. hit, I stood up and said I had somewhere important to be, and I left. My supervisor didn't try to stop me. This went on for about a week. Every day I would leave right at 5 p.m. while everyone else stayed for the unpaid meeting. I could tell my co-workers were talking about me, probably thinking I was being disrespectful or trying to cause trouble. Finally, my supervisor pulled me aside one morning. He said he wanted to talk to me for a minute and asked about this important thing I had to get to every day after work. He wanted to know what exactly it was. I told him it was a personal matter. He pressed further, asking if I could tell him what it was. He explained that the team meetings were important for communication. I told him that I understood they were important, but my personal time started at 5 p.m. If the meetings were mandatory, then they should be scheduled during work hours, or we should be paid for staying late. He looked uncomfortable and tried to explain that this was just how things worked, and that everyone was expected to participate. I simply repeated that it was a personal matter and walked away. He seemed unsure how to respond and just said, "Okay." The interesting thing was, he never actually ordered me to stay. He never wrote me up or threatened my job. He seemed to realize that what they were doing was wrong, but he had gotten away with it for so long that he didn't know how to handle someone who wouldn't play along. After about a week of me leaving at 5 p.m. sharp, something started to change. I noticed one of my co-workers looking at the clock during the meeting. Then, right at 5:05 p.m., he stood up and said he actually needed to head out too, and he left. My supervisor looked flustered but didn't stop him either. The next day, 2 people left early, then 3. Within just a few days of me starting this routine, half the team was walking out at 5 p.m. or shortly after. My supervisor was clearly getting frustrated. The meetings were becoming pointless when half the team would leave partway through. He tried a few times to emphasize how important these meetings were, but people had already realized they had the power to just leave. By the end of the second week, almost everyone was walking out at 5 p.m. The meetings had essentially fallen apart. Finally, my supervisor made an announcement on a Friday afternoon. He told us that starting Monday, our daily team meetings would be held at 4:40 p.m. instead of after work. And just like that, the problem was solved. The meetings were moved to within work hours where they belonged, and everyone started getting paid for their time again. It was amazing how quickly things changed once people realized they didn't have to accept being taken advantage of. All it took was one person to stand up and say no. The supervisor had been getting away with stealing 20 minutes of unpaid labor from 10 people every single day. That's over 3 hours of free work daily, simply because everyone was too afraid or too conditioned to speak up. The supervisor never tried to pull that stunt again. I'm 26 years old and work 2 jobs to make ends meet. I have a day job at a warehouse and work nights at a grocery store. I live in a small apartment with my mother because she lost her job 3 years ago and couldn't afford rent on her own. Being her only child, I felt responsible for making sure she had a roof over her head. At first, things were manageable. I covered rent, utilities, groceries, and basic necessities for both of us. My mother would occasionally ask for extra money for things like new clothes or eating out, but I usually said no because my budget was already stretched thin. I was barely saving anything for myself, and honestly, I was getting tired of supporting someone who seemed perfectly capable of working but chose not to. The real problem started about 6 months ago when my mother became obsessed with the idea that I owed her money, not just the normal expenses, but money for raising me as a child. She told me that I should be paying her back for all those years she took care of me. When I asked what she meant, she explained that she meant for feeding me, clothing me, everything. She said I should know how much it costs to raise a child and that she had breastfed me for 2 years, which was worth thousands of dollars. I thought she was joking at first, but she was completely serious. She started demanding that I give her extra money every month as repayment for my childhood. When I refused and explained that parents are supposed to take care of their children without expecting payment, she got furious. She insisted that she didn't have to breastfeed me and could have used formula instead, but she gave me the best nutrition possible. She claimed that was a service worth money. I told her that's what mothers do and that you don't charge your own child for basic parenting. She disagreed and said she was charging me now. She claimed I owed her at least $50,000 for everything she did for me. $50,000 for doing what every parent is supposed to do. I told her absolutely not, and that's when things got really crazy. The first time she called 911, I thought there was a real emergency. I heard her on the phone saying someone had assaulted her and that she needed police immediately. I rushed to see what was wrong and she was sitting calmly on the couch. I asked what happened and if she was okay. She calmly told me that the police were coming to arrest me. When I asked for what, she said for assaulting her by refusing to pay me what I owed her. I stared at her in complete shock. She had called emergency services because I wouldn't give her money. When the 2 officers arrived, she met them at the door with this dramatic performance. She told the officers that, thank God, they were there because her son had assaulted her. When they asked where her injuries were, she admitted that he didn't hit her physically, but said he was financially assaulting her by refusing to pay his debt. The officers looked confused and asked her to explain. She launched into this whole speech about how I owed her money for breastfeeding and raising me, and that my refusal to pay was a form of assault. She actually asked them to arrest me and said she wanted to file a lien on my money for not paying the debt I owed her. One of the officers explained that's not how assault works, and that she can't file a lien against someone for not giving them money they don't legally owe. She argued back that she was his mother and that I owed her for giving birth to me. The officers were patient but firm. They explained that calling 911 for non-emergencies wastes resources and that what she was describing wasn't a crime. They warned her not to call again unless there was a real emergency. But she didn't listen. Over the next 4 months, she called 911 8 more times. Every single time it was because I had refused to give her money for something ridiculous. New shoes, a spa day, expensive skincare products, a vacation to Florida. Each time she would claim I had assaulted her by saying no. The conversations with the police became a routine. She would tell them that I was financially abusing her and that I wouldn't pay for her needs. The officers would explain that adult children aren't required to pay for their parents' wants. She would insist that she fed me as a baby and that created a legal debt. They would tell her that it doesn't work that way. The officers started getting frustrated. Different cops would show up, but they all said the same thing. They would take me aside and ask if I was okay, if I felt safe living with her. I always said yes because despite everything, she had never been physically violent. I would apologize for them having to keep coming out and tell them I didn't know how to make her stop. One officer suggested that she might need professional help. I explained that I had tried to talk to her about seeing someone, but she refused. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I had just gotten home from my night shift, exhausted and ready to sleep. My mother approached me with a printout of some luxury cruise that cost $8,000. She told me she had decided she wanted to take this cruise and that I needed to pay for it. I said I wasn't paying for a cruise because I could barely afford our basic expenses. She said fine, then she was calling the police again. I begged her not to and told her she was going to get in trouble if she kept making false reports. She insisted it wasn't false and that I was stealing from her by not paying my debt. She called 911 while I stood there begging her not to. When the same 2 officers from the first incident arrived, I could see the frustration on their faces. The first officer told her this was the 9th time they had been called to this address for the same non-issue. She said she would keep calling until they arrested me for theft. The second officer said she was wasting police resources and that they had warned her multiple times that this needed to stop. She got louder and said she knew her rights, that she paid taxes, and that they worked for her. She demanded they arrest her son right now. That's when the first officer told her she was under arrest for filing false police reports and wasting emergency resources. That's when my mother completely lost it. She started screaming about how this was all my fault and how I had turned the police against her. When the first officer tried to put handcuffs on her, she swung her arm wildly and somehow caught the second officer across the ear with her fingernails. Blood started trickling down his face. The second officer told her she was now under arrest for assaulting a police officer too. Even then, she kept yelling that this was all my fault and that I had made her do this by not paying her. Even when they were putting her in the police car, she was yelling about how I owed her money and how the justice system was corrupt for not making me pay my debt. The trial was quick. She was found guilty of filing false police reports, wasting emergency resources, and assaulting a police officer. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison and ordered her to pay fines and restitution. Now I live alone in the apartment, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I don't have to worry about coming home to police cars in my driveway. I don't have to listen to lectures about imaginary debts I supposedly owe for being born. I can actually save money from my paychecks instead of having it all demanded from me. I know it sounds terrible to say I'm relieved my mother is in prison, but I am. Maybe when she gets out, she'll have learned something. Or maybe she won't, and I'll have to make the difficult decision about whether to let her back into my life. Either way, right now, I'm finally free to live without someone constantly trying to guilt me into paying for their fantasy lifestyle. I'm a 50-year-old father of 2, and I've been married to my wife for almost 20 years now. We have a 17-year-old son who's about to graduate high school and head off to college in the fall, and a 14-year-old daughter who's in her first year of high school. My son has been dating his girlfriend for about 8 months now, and she's a sweet kid who works part-time at a local coffee shop while finishing her senior year. Last Saturday night changed everything for our family. I was sitting in my living room watching television when I got the call no parent ever wants to receive. The hospital told me my son had been in a serious car accident and that I needed to get there immediately. The drive to the hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. When we arrived, the doctors explained what had happened. A drunk driver in a pickup truck had run a red light and slammed directly into my son's small convertible. The impact was devastating. My son's car was completely totaled, crumpled like a tin can. The fact that he survived it all was nothing short of a miracle. The injuries were extensive though. He had multiple broken bones in his arms and legs, several fractured ribs, and needed over 40 stitches across various cuts on his face and body. The doctor said he would need surgery on his left arm and that his recovery would take months. Seeing him lying there in that hospital bed, bruised and bandaged, was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever experienced as a father. My wife, daughter, and I had been at the hospital for about an hour when his girlfriend arrived. She must have gotten the news and rushed straight from work because she was still wearing her coffee shop apron and had flour smudges on her black pants. The moment she saw him, she broke down crying and ran to his bedside. She asked him if he was okay and said she had gotten there as fast as she could. My son told her he was all right, just banged up pretty good. She gently hugged him, being careful not to hurt his injuries, and gave him several soft kisses on his forehead and cheeks. She also kissed his lips a few times, but it was all very tender and loving. Nothing inappropriate at all. The girlfriend told him she had been so scared when she heard the news and lost focus on everything at work. My son apologized for scaring her but said the doctors told him he would be fine. She stayed by his side for the next several hours, holding his hand, talking quietly with him, and helping him with small things like adjusting his pillow or getting him water. She was incredibly attentive and caring. At one point, she even helped him eat his dinner because his right arm was in a cast and he had trouble managing the fork properly. She offered to help him with his food and he thanked her, admitting that eating was harder than he thought it would be. She told him not to worry about it and that she would help him with whatever he needed. Watching them together, I felt genuinely happy that my son had found someone who cared about him so deeply. She had dropped everything to be there for him in his most vulnerable moment. That's the kind of partner any parent would want for their child. Around 10 that evening, my brother took my daughter home since it was a school night and she needed rest. My wife and I stayed a bit longer, but eventually decided we should head home too and let the kids have some time alone together. The drive home started quietly, but then my wife spoke up. She said she couldn't believe I didn't say anything to the girlfriend. I asked her what she meant. She complained about all the kissing and touching, calling it completely inappropriate. I asked what she was talking about and pointed out that the girlfriend was just being supportive. She had been scared and relieved that he was okay. My wife said it felt weird seeing that, especially in front of his family, and that I should have told her to tone it down. I was genuinely confused by her reaction. What I had witnessed was a young woman showing genuine love and concern for her boyfriend who had nearly died in a car accident. I reminded my wife that the girlfriend had rushed there straight from work and was terrified something had happened to him. A few kisses seemed pretty normal under the circumstances. My wife said it was gross and that I needed to tell her she couldn't do that anymore when we were around. I asked if she was serious. Our son almost died that night, and she was worried about his girlfriend showing affection. She said yes, she was serious. It made her uncomfortable, and it wasn't appropriate behavior in a hospital room with family present. The conversation continued to escalate as we drove. My wife became increasingly agitated, insisting that I needed to set boundaries with the girlfriend about physical affection when family was present. She told me I needed to step up and do my job as a father and tell the girlfriend that kind of behavior wasn't acceptable. I said my job as a father right now was to support my son's recovery. If having his girlfriend there made him happy and helped him heal, then I was all for it. My wife asked if I was just going to let her hang all over him whenever she wanted. I said she wasn't hanging all over him. She was being loving and supportive. Wasn't that what we wanted for our children? My wife said not in front of us because it was disrespectful. The argument continued for the rest of the drive home and picked up again once we were inside the house. My wife seemed determined to make this an issue despite everything else our family was dealing with. She said she wanted me to call the girlfriend's parents and discuss appropriate boundaries. I told her I wasn't doing that because the girlfriend did absolutely nothing wrong. She said fine, then she would handle it herself and talk to the girlfriend directly next time we were at the hospital. I told her she would not embarrass our son or his girlfriend. He was lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, and the last thing he needed was family drama. She insisted that someone needed to address this situation. I said the only situation that needed addressing was our son's recovery, and everything else was secondary. The next morning, my wife was still fixated on the issue. She spent breakfast complaining about the girlfriend's behavior and insisting that I was being irresponsible as a father by not addressing it. She told me she had been thinking about it all night and that I was setting a bad example by allowing that kind of behavior. I asked what bad example she meant. That people who love each other show affection during difficult times. She said that there were no boundaries or respect for family. I pointed out that the girlfriend showed nothing but respect. She was polite to all of us and focused entirely on supporting him. Over the next few days, every conversation somehow circled back to this issue. My wife would bring up the girlfriend's behavior during dinner while we were getting ready for bed, even during phone calls with relatives about my son's condition. She became obsessed with it. When we returned to the hospital the following day, his girlfriend was already there. She had brought him some books and his favorite snacks from home. She was reading to him when we arrived because holding the book was difficult with his injuries. The girlfriend told my son that his parents were there. My son greeted us and mentioned that she had brought him those cookies I like too. My wife said that was nice, but I could see the tension in her face. She watched every interaction between them like a hawk. When the girlfriend gently brushed my son's hair out of his eyes, my wife actually made a disapproving noise. Later, when the girlfriend stepped out to get coffee, my wife saw her opportunity. She told my son she thought it would be better if his girlfriend limited her visits. She said all this constant attention wasn't healthy for his recovery. My son asked what she meant and said his girlfriend was helping him feel better. My wife said she just thought he needed space to focus on healing without distractions. My son said she wasn't a distraction and that she had been amazing through all of this. I told him his mother was just worried about him and that we all were. I could see my son was getting upset. His heart rate monitor even started beeping faster. He asked if there was something wrong with his girlfriend being there and if she had done something. My wife said it wasn't about what she did but about what was appropriate. My son said he didn't understand because she had been nothing but helpful and supportive. That's when I knew I had to put an end to this before it escalated further and truly hurt my son's recovery. I told him there was nothing inappropriate happening and that his girlfriend had been wonderful. We were grateful she cared about him so much. My wife said we needed to discuss this as a family. I said no, we didn't, and that this conversation was over. When his girlfriend returned with a coffee, she immediately sensed the tension in the room. She asked if everything was okay. My son said yeah, everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. And over the next week, my wife continued her campaign to limit the girlfriend's involvement in my son's recovery. She suggested visiting hours for the girlfriend, complained about her bringing him food, and even criticized her for helping him with physical therapy exercises. My wife actually approached the hospital staff to ask about policies regarding non-family visitors in patient rooms. When I found out about this, I was furious. I asked her if she went to the nurses behind my back. She said she was just asking about their policies. I said she was trying to find a way to ban his girlfriend from visiting. She said she thought some boundaries would be healthy for everyone. I told her the only unhealthy thing was her obsession with controlling the situation. That evening, I made a decision. I called my wife's sister, someone whose opinion my wife respected, and explained the entire situation. Within an hour, my sister-in-law was at our house. My sister-in-law said she heard about what had been happening at the hospital. My wife said finally someone who understood her position. My sister-in-law said actually she thought my wife was being completely unreasonable. That poor girl was showing exactly the kind of love and support you'd want for your own child. My wife said but the public displays of affection were inappropriate. My sister-in-law said they were teenagers in love and he almost died. A few kisses and hugs were perfectly normal. My wife was creating drama where none needed to exist. The conversation continued for over an hour with my sister-in-law systematically dismantling every argument my wife had made about the girlfriend's behavior. By the end, even my wife seemed to realize how unreasonable she had been. The next day at the hospital, my wife actually apologized to the girlfriend for any awkwardness she might have sensed. The girlfriend, being the gracious person she is, simply smiled and said she understood that everyone was under stress. My son made a full recovery over the following months, and his girlfriend was there supporting him every step of the way. They're still together now, stronger than ever, and my wife has come to appreciate what a wonderful young woman she is. I look younger than my age, and at 24 it's become more of a curse than a blessing. My baby face and naturally soft voice make people assume I'm still in high school. It doesn't help that I'm pretty small for my age too. I've had police officers stop me on the street to check my ID when they see me smoking, convinced I'm some underage kid breaking the law. Family gatherings are the worst. Distant relatives always feel the need to lecture me about making adult choices when I'm literally an adult. The whole situation started because of my health problems. I've been dealing with various medical issues since I was a teenager, and the stress of constant doctor visits, treatments, and uncertainty about my future led me to pick up smoking. I know it's not the healthiest coping mechanism, but when you're dealing with chronic pain and the anxiety that comes with multiple health conditions, sometimes you just need something to take the edge off. I smoke both regular cigarettes and vape, depending on my mood and where I am. That particular Tuesday morning, I was standing at my usual bus stop on Maple Street, waiting for the 7:30 bus to get to my job at the local grocery store. I work part-time there to help pay for my medical expenses since my insurance doesn't cover everything. The morning was pretty typical, a bit chilly, not too many people around yet. I lit up a cigarette and was just minding my own business, checking my phone and watching for the bus. That's when I noticed this woman walking towards me. She looked to be in her 50s or 60s, well dressed in one of those expensive looking coats. She had this determined look on her face that immediately put me on guard. I've learned to recognize that expression. It usually means someone's about to stick their nose where it doesn't belong. She walked right up to me, completely ignoring any concept of personal space. She planted herself about 2 feet away from me and crossed her arms. Then she asked me if I had any idea what I was doing to my body. I looked around thinking maybe she was talking to someone else, but it was just us at the bus stop. I asked her if I knew her. She told me I didn't need to know her to accept some good advice. She said I was clearly just a teenager and accused me of poisoning myself with cancer sticks. I corrected her, telling her I was actually 24 and just waiting for my bus to work. She completely ignored what I said and kept going. She told me not to lie to her and claimed she had grandchildren my age. She insisted she knew a high school student when she saw one. Then she started lecturing me about how I had my whole life ahead of me and asked if I realized that smoking kills. She went on about lung cancer and heart disease, telling me I was going to die young if I kept smoking. I was getting more irritated by the second. This complete stranger was not only lecturing me about my personal choices, but also refusing to believe I was an adult. I tried to be polite at first and told her I appreciated her concern, but explained that I was an adult and could make my own decisions. I pointed out that I wasn't bothering anyone. She responded by saying that was exactly the kind of attitude that was going to kill me. She told me I thought I was invincible now, but warned me to wait until I was older. She painted a picture of me being sick and dying in a hospital bed, wishing I'd listened to people who tried to help me. She was really getting worked up now, gesturing wildly with her hands and raising her voice. A few other people had started to gather at the bus stop, and they were all staring at us. I felt my face getting red from embarrassment and anger. She continued her lecture, telling me she was saying all this because she cared about young people like me. She suggested I probably thought smoking made me look cool, but insisted it didn't. She said it made me look stupid and immature. Then she delivered the final blow, claiming my parents would be ashamed if they knew what I was doing. That's when I really lost it. This woman didn't know anything about me, my life, or my circumstances. She was making assumptions left and right and wouldn't even listen when I tried to correct her. But what really got to me was her comment about my parents being ashamed. My parents have been incredibly supportive through all my health issues, and they understand why I smoke even if they don't love it. The woman kept going, apparently thinking she was really getting through to me. She told me I didn't understand how precious life was when I was young. She said I thought I had forever, but I didn't. She explained that cancer didn't care how old I was and could strike anyone at any time. She warned me that then I'd be sorry I didn't take better care of myself. That's when I decided I'd had enough. She wanted to talk about cancer and medical issues with a complete stranger. Fine, I could play that game. I told her that I already had a brain tumor, so I'd probably die soon anyway. The change in her expression was immediate and dramatic. All the color drained from her face and her mouth fell open. She looked like someone had just slapped her. She stammered and asked me what I had said. I repeated myself, telling her she heard me correctly. I explained that I had a brain tumor, so all her lectures about how smoking was going to kill me were kind of pointless. For context, I do actually have a brain tumor, but it's non-malignant and my doctors are monitoring it. I'm not actually dying anytime soon, but she didn't need to know that. I have several other health conditions that I deal with on a daily basis, and the tumor is just one of them. The stress of managing all these medical issues is part of why I started smoking in the first place. She stood there stammering for a few seconds, clearly trying to figure out what to say. She mumbled something that sounded like an apology, but I couldn't make out the exact words. Then she quickly turned around and walked away, leaving me alone at the bus stop. The other people who had been watching the whole scene gave me sympathetic looks and went back to minding their own business. A few minutes later, my bus arrived, and I got on like nothing had happened. I know smoking isn't healthy, and I'm not proud of the habit, but I'm an adult dealing with serious health issues, and I don't need random strangers on the street telling me how to live my life. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.